Morgan stood at the back of the church, half hidden behind the final row of polished wooden pews, his body rigid as if movement alone might expose him. He hadn't planned to come this close. He told himself he would stand near the doors, slip in quietly, observe, and leave without being noticed. But the moment the music swelled and every guest rose to their feet, his legs carried him forward anyway, just enough to see her. Haley. She appeared at the far end of the aisle in an ivory gown that fit her like it had been made for her alone, not stiff, not dramatic, just elegant in a way that felt earned. Her shoulders were relaxed, her chin lifted, her steps unhurried. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't searching the room. She knew exactly where she was going. Straight toward Sean Patterson. Morgan swallowed hard. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of shared routines, quiet mornings, inside jokes, future plans that once felt solid. All of it abandoned for a younger woman he had convinced himself would make life feel exciting again. And now, here he was, watching the same woman he once walked away from move toward a man whose name alone carried power, influence, and wealth, yet whose eyes, locked on Haley, showed nothing but awe. Sean stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, posture composed but barely contained emotion flickering across his face. He didn't look around the church. He didn't acknowledge the guests, the cameras, the moment. His attention never left Haley, not even for a second. Morgan felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't the look of a man impressed by beauty alone. This was the look of a man who knew exactly what he had found and intended to protect it. As Haley drew closer, Morgan noticed the details he once overlooked. The confidence in her stride, the calm certainty in her expression, the quiet strength she carried without needing permission. She wasn't glowing because she was marrying a billionaire. She was glowing because she was loved correctly. And for the first time since the day he walked out of their house, Morgan understood something he had refused to face. He hadn't left a woman who lacked spark. He had left a woman whose value he never learned how to see. The pastor's voice carried through the church, warm and steady, guiding the final words of the ceremony. Morgan barely heard them. His focus narrowed as Haley reached the altar and Sean stepped closer, gently taking her hands as if the rest of the world no longer mattered. "You may kiss the bride." Applause filled the space, rising quickly, surrounding them. Sean leaned in and kissed Haley, not rushed, not hesitant, not for display. It was deliberate, certain, a promise kept. Morgan's breath caught. This was the moment Haley finally received the love she deserved, and the moment Morgan fully understood the price of what he had thrown away. The sound of clapping echoed around him, but he felt strangely removed from it, like a man standing outside a room where his life had taken a turn without him. There was no anger in his chest now, no defense, just a heavy awareness settling deep inside him. She wasn't coming back. She wasn't frozen in the past he left her in. She had moved forward, and she had done it without him. Morgan lowered his gaze, his shoulders sinking slightly as the reality set in. The woman he once assumed would always be there had built a future that no longer included him. And the man waiting at the altar hadn't rescued her. He had recognized her. Morgan took a slow step backward, careful not to draw attention, the applause still rolling as Haley and Sean turned toward their guests, smiling, whole, unburdened. And as he stood there, unseen, one truth rang louder than the celebration around him. The life he gave up had not only survived without him, it had surpassed him. Welcome back to Stories by Mr. Flex, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. The applause inside the church continued, loud and joyful, but it slowly faded from focus as the weight of the moment settled. Somewhere between the clapping hands and the soft music that followed, a deeper truth hovered in the air, one that reached far beyond this wedding, beyond this couple, and straight into the hearts of anyone who had ever loved deeply and been left behind. Because stories like this don't begin at the altar. They begin long before the vows. They begin in quiet rooms behind closed doors in moments no one posts or celebrates. Have you ever given your all to someone, only for them to decide it wasn't enough anymore? Have you ever built a life with a person, only to watch them trade it in for something newer, shinier, easier. And have you ever wondered what might happen if, instead of begging to be chosen, you finally chose yourself? Haley once lived inside those questions. The woman standing radiant at the altar hadn't always looked so sure of her footing. There was a time, not even that long ago, when she sat on the edge of a bed in Dallas, wrapped in silence, staring at a closet that no longer felt like hers. Half of it stood empty, hangers swaying slightly as if even they were unsettled by how quickly everything had changed. That morning, the house didn't feel broken all at once. It felt wrong in small, cutting ways, drawers left open, shoes missing from their place by the door, a space beside her where someone used to sleep. Haley sat there, shoulders slumped, eyes unfocused, holding onto the last thing he'd left behind, a sweatshirt that still carried the faint trace of familiarity. Not comfort, just proof. Morgan had walked out, not after a long battle, not after years of distance. He left with words that still echoed in her head, sharp and careless, delivered like explanations instead of wounds. He told her he had met someone new, someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again, as if she had been the thing draining the color from his life. The memory flickered and shifted, quick images bleeding into one another. Haley crying quietly into a pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear, the sound of the front door closing, her phone lighting up with Imani's name just as she felt herself beginning to fold inward. The relief that came with not being alone when Imani showed up at the door, arms full of wine, ice cream, and fierce loyalty. Another image surfaced. Haley sitting in her mother Darlene's living room later that night, hands wrapped around a warm mug, finally letting herself break. Her mother's voice steady and grounding, reminding her that being left didn't mean being unworthy. These weren't random moments. They were the foundation of everything that followed. This isn't just a story about a husband who left for a younger woman. It's about what happens when a woman believes her life has ended, only to discover that it was actually waiting to begin. And that beginning didn't come softly. 1 year after that bedroom went quiet, Haley found herself in Austin, moving fast through the lobby of a modern building, juggling an iced coffee and a portfolio, late and slightly flustered. She was focused on getting where she needed to be, not looking up in time to stop herself from colliding directly into someone. The coffee flew. The lid popped off. Liquid splashed across a crisp white shirt. Haley froze. "I am so sorry," she blurted out, panic rushing in as she reached for napkins, her face heating with embarrassment. She could already feel the apology tumbling over itself in her mouth, rehearsed in fear before it was even needed. But the man she had run into didn't raise his voice. He didn't scowl. He didn't look at her like she had ruined his day. He laughed. "It's fine," he said calmly, holding up a hand to stop her from unraveling any further. "Really, I needed to slow down anyway." Haley finally looked up and met the eyes of Sean Patterson. The same heartbreak that shattered her in Dallas was what pushed her into this building in Austin, carrying her straight into the path of a billionaire CEO who didn't see a mess or a mistake standing in front of him. He saw her. So how did a woman abandoned in a quiet house in Dallas become the bride walking confidently down that aisle years later, this time on her own terms? How did the woman who was left behind become the woman no one could replace? Before we rewind and show you exactly how Haley turned heartbreak into a whole new life, take a second to hit that like button, drop a comment if you believe karma has a way of circling back, and subscribe to Stories by Mr. Flex so you don't miss stories like this one. Now, let's go back to the day he walked out. The house didn't sound the way it used to. Haley noticed it the moment she woke up. There was no humming from the bathroom, no footsteps moving across the hallway, no faint clatter of a mug being set down too hard on the kitchen counter. Just stillness, thick and unfamiliar, pressing in on her from every direction. She lay on her back for several seconds, staring at the ceiling, waiting for her body to catch up with what her mind already knew. The space beside her was empty, cold, untouched. Slowly she turned her head. The other half of the bed looked wrong, too smooth, too neat. Morgan's pillow was gone. So was the extra blanket he always kicked off during the night. For a split second, a foolish part of her hoped he had just gotten up early, that maybe he'd gone for a drive to cool off after the argument, that maybe this wasn't real yet. Then she sat up. Her feet touched the floor, and the quiet followed her as she stood. It followed her into the bedroom, where the closet doors were still open from the night before. Haley hadn't closed them. She hadn't been able to. One entire side was nearly empty. Hangers swayed slightly, as if the air itself had been disturbed by how suddenly everything had been removed. Morgan's dress shirts, gone. His jackets, gone. The shoe rack, once crowded, now looked uneven and unfinished. Her chest tightened. She stepped closer, reaching out without thinking, fingers brushing against a sweatshirt that had been overlooked. It was gray, worn soft from years of washing, sleeves stretched slightly at the cuffs. She pulled it down and pressed it against her face. The scent was faint, almost gone, but it was enough. Haley sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the sweatshirt to her chest as if holding it tighter might make the last 20 to 4 hours rewind themselves. Her breath hitched, then broke, and the tears came quietly at first. She didn't want to hear herself. She didn't want the walls to remember this version of her. Why wasn't I enough? The question crept in without permission, settling heavy and unwanted. She replayed the morning over and over again, each word landing exactly where it had before. I didn't plan for this, Morgan had said, pacing the kitchen like he was late for an appointment instead of ending a marriage. I just met someone. She's younger. She makes me feel alive again. Alive. As if the life they had built together, 7 years of routines, holidays, shared plans, had been some kind of slow suffocation. Haley remembered standing frozen by the sink, hands gripping the counter, watching his mouth move while her ears rang. I need more adventure, he continued, more spark. She remembered how he wouldn't look at her when her eyes filled, how he reached for her shoulders when she started to cry, offering a hug that felt like an apology already rehearsed. I never meant to hurt you, he'd said, and then he left anyway. The memory ended the same way every time, with the sound of the front door closing and the echo it left behind. Haley wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of the sweatshirt and stood up, forcing herself to move. Staying in the bedroom felt unbearable. Every surface carried a reminder. She walked into the living room, bare feet soft against the carpet, and stopped when she noticed something on the coffee table, their wedding album. She hadn't put it there. She hadn't touched it in years, but there it was, lying open, as if it had been waiting for her. Haley approached slowly and sat down, flipping through the thick pages with unsteady hands. There they were, smiling, laughing, young and hopeful. In one photo, Morgan lifted her veil, both of them caught mid-laughter, unaware of the future waiting just out of frame. How did we get from that to this? Her phone buzzed suddenly, loud in the silence, making her flinch. She glanced at the screen, through blurred vision, and saw Imani's name lighting up. She answered without thinking. Hey, Haley said, though it came out thin and broken. Oh, Hales. Imani's voice softened instantly. I just heard. Are you at home? Haley nodded even though Imani couldn't see her. Yeah, stay there, Imani said firmly. I'm coming over. Right now. Haley tried to protest, but the line went dead before she could. She stared at the phone for a moment, then let it fall into her lap. A small part of her felt relief. Another part felt ashamed for needing help. Imani arrived less than 30 minutes later, keys jangling as she pushed the door open. She took one look at Haley, red eyes, hunched shoulders, sweatshirt clutched too tightly, and dropped everything in her hands. That was all it took. Haley broke. She barely registered the wine bottle being set down or the overnight bag sliding to the floor before Imani wrapped her arms around her. The sobs came hard and fast, shaking her frame as she cried into her friend's shoulder. I can't believe he did this, Haley whispered. I don't understand. I know, Imani murmured, holding her steady. I know. They ended up on the couch, a blanket pulled over their legs, the world reduced to shared silence and quiet support. Imani passed her a spoonful of ice cream without a word, the familiar sweetness grounding in a way Haley hadn't expected. After a while, when the worst of the crying had eased, Imani spoke again. You know this isn't about you, right? Haley stared ahead. How can it not be? Imani turned toward her fully, eyes sharp with conviction. Because only someone foolish trades real love for a fantasy. You didn't fail. He did. Haley swallowed, unsure if she was ready to believe that, but she wanted to. That night, as exhaustion finally pulled her under, Haley lay awake for a long time, staring into the dark. The pain was still there, raw and heavy, but beneath it, something else flickered. resolve. He had taken enough from her already. Her trust, her certainty, her sense of home. He would not take her future. And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet decision, made alone in the dark, was the first step toward everything that would come next. The air felt different the moment Haley stepped out of her car. It wasn't just the heat, though Austin had a sharper kind of warmth than Dallas. It was the movement. The way people walked with purpose but not pressure. The sound of conversation drifting from coffee shops, the low hum of traffic mixing with laughter, music, and the occasional shout from somewhere down the block. She stood for a moment beside her parked car, one hand resting on the roof, taking it all in. This was real. The apartment building sat a few streets away from the University of Texas campus, modest but clean, with balconies that overlooked a narrow stretch of road lined with trees. Students moved in clusters nearby, backpacks slung over shoulders, voices animated. Haley watched them with a small smile before turning back to her trunk. Her life fit into fewer boxes than she expected. As she carried the first load up the stairs, she felt the weight in her arms and the quiet steadiness in her chest. No one was rushing her, no one was watching. For the first time in a long while, every decision in front of her belonged to her alone. The apartment was simple. Neutral walls, bare floors, sunlight spilling in through wide windows. Haley set the box down in the center of the living room and stood there, hands on her hips, surveying the space. No memories clung to these walls yet. She liked that. The first night she slept on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The city noise filtered in through a cracked window, unfamiliar but oddly comforting. When she woke the next morning, there was no heaviness in her chest, only nerves and anticipation. Orientation began early. Haley walked across campus with a notebook tucked under her arm, feeling the age gap immediately. Many of her classmates looked fresh out of undergrad, eyes bright, energy restless. She was older than most of them. Wiser too, though that knowledge didn't always quiet the voice in her head that whispered questions she hadn't invited. Do I belong here? She pushed the thought aside and took her seat. The first few days moved quickly. Syllabi were passed out. Expectations were laid bare. Professors wasted no time reminding them that this program would demand everything they had. Haley welcomed it. In the first case discussion, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing the rhythm of the room. When the professor opened the floor for insight, a few voices jumped in, eager, theoretical, polished. Haley waited, then she raised her hand. She didn't quote a textbook. She talked about execution, about messaging that failed because it didn't respect its audience, about campaigns that worked because they understood people instead of selling to them. The room shifted. The professor nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. That's a grounded perspective, he said. Experience matters. Haley wrote that sentence down. Over the next week, it happened again and again. Group projects, discussions, simulations. She wasn't the loudest voice, but when she spoke, people listened. Not because she demanded attention, but because her words carried weight. Still, nights were quieter. After long days on campus, Haley returned to her apartment and sat by the window, city lights flickering in the distance. Sometimes her thoughts drifted backward, uninvited, toward the woman she had been months earlier, sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at a closet that no longer felt shared. She didn't linger there. Instead, she compared. That woman had been frozen by loss. This one was moving with intention. Her phone buzzed one evening as she was heating leftovers. Imani's name lit up the screen. You alive over there, college girl? Imani teased the moment Haley answered. Barely, Haley laughed. My brain hurts, but in a good way. Darlene's voice chimed in from the background. Tell me you're eating. I am, Mama, Haley replied. Real food. I promise. They talked about everything and nothing. Group projects, professors, the strange comfort of starting over in a place where no one knew her history. This is your investment season, Darlene said firmly. You don't look back during an investment season. Haley nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. I won't. By the second week, flyers and emails about upcoming events flooded her inbox. Panels, guest lectures, networking mixers. One name appeared again and again, spoken with excitement by classmates and mentioned by professors in passing. Sean Patterson, the CEO of Ventura Corp., a major player, a rare appearance on campus. People buzzed about it between classes, speculating about who might get noticed, who might land an opportunity. Haley listened quietly. She wasn't chasing attention. She was chasing alignment. Still, when the please reply invitation appeared in her inbox, her finger hovered over the screen longer than expected. She inhaled once, then she clicked yes. By the third week of the program, the pace stopped feeling new and started feeling real. Haley learned quickly that there was no such thing as an off day in the MBA schedule. Mornings began early, usually with case readings she finished while sipping coffee at her small kitchen counter. Afternoons were packed with lectures, group discussions, and simulations that demanded full attention. Evenings stretched late, often swallowed by study sessions that blurred into one another. Some of her classmates seemed energized by the constant grind. Others masked their stress with confidence and loud opinions. Haley stayed somewhere in between, focused, measured, and determined not to waste the opportunity she had fought for. Still, the pressure was there. It crept in during quiet moments, usually late at night, when the campus lights dimmed and the library emptied out in stages. Haley often stayed behind, seated at a long table near the windows, stacks of notes spread neatly in front of her. She worked methodically, highlighting key points, rewriting strategies in her own words, forcing clarity where confusion tried to take root. That was when doubt tended to tap on her shoulder. Who am I to impress people like this? Who am I to think I belong in rooms with executives and billionaires? The thought didn't roar, it whispered, and that made it more dangerous. Haley closed her notebook one night and leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting to the ceiling. For a moment, the memory of Morgan's words threatened to surface, the way he had framed his departure as something she lacked, something she failed to provide. She shut it down immediately. Not today. She reopened her laptop and pulled up her resume instead. If the upcoming networking event was going to happen, and it was, she would be ready, not polished for approval, prepared for opportunity. Haley spent the next few nights refining every line of her resume. She trimmed language that felt inflated and strengthened points that reflected real results. Campaign growth, client retention, strategy execution. No fluff, just truth. She practiced her elevator pitch under her breath while walking back to her apartment, adjusting phrasing until it felt natural instead of rehearsed. She focused on clarity, not charm, substance, not sparkle. Between classes, she researched Ventura Corp. She learned about the company's growth trajectory, its acquisitions, its public commitment to innovation and inclusion. She read interviews with Sean Patterson, noting how rarely he spoke about himself and how often he redirected attention to his team. That stood out to her. The more she read, the more the event shifted in her mind. It wasn't about impressing a billionaire. It was about being in a space where preparation met possibility. Still, nerves found her. The night before the event, Haley sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop balanced in front of her, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a video call. Imani's face filled the screen first, bright and animated. Darlene leaned into view a second later, glasses perched on her nose. "Look at you," Imani said, grinning. "Studying like you're about to run the company already." Haley laughed softly. "It feels like everyone else is 5 steps ahead." Darlene tilted her head. "Ahead of who?" Haley paused. "Me. That's not how this works," Darlene said calmly. "You walk into that room like you belong there because you do." Imani leaned closer to the camera. "Exactly. Go give that billionaire your LinkedIn, not your heart." Haley shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Y'all are ridiculous." "And correct," Imani added. After the call ended, Haley stood and opened her closet. Her options were simple. She passed over anything that felt forced or overly formal and settled on a dress that reflected exactly how she wanted to show up. Clean lines, understated, confident. Nothing flashy, nothing apologetic. She laid it out carefully, then placed her portfolio beside it. Sleep came late, but it came. The next morning moved faster than she expected. Haley showered, dressed, and checked herself once in the mirror before grabbing her things. She took a breath, steadying herself, and stepped out into the hallway. The sun was already high, heat rising from the pavement as she locked her apartment door behind her. She balanced an iced coffee in one hand and tucked her portfolio under her arm, adjusting her grip as she picked up her pace. She was running slightly behind. The building hosting the event came into view, glass reflecting the sky above. Haley crossed the street, heart beating a little faster, not from fear, but from readiness. This was not about luck, this was about showing up, and as she pushed through the doors, moving quickly through the lobby with her focus fixed straight ahead, she had no idea that the next few seconds were about to shift the direction of her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Haley pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the lobby, her pace quick but controlled. The space opened up around her. High ceilings, polished floors, soft voices carrying from different directions as guests checked in or clustered near tall tables. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, tightened her grip on the iced coffee in her hand, and glanced down at her phone. She was later than she wanted to be. Her focus narrowed to the registration desk ahead, and she angled her body to move around a small group standing off to the side. Her heel caught slightly on the edge of the floor mat, just enough to throw her balance off by a fraction of a second. That was all it took. She collided with someone moving in the opposite direction, the impact sharp and unexpected. The iced coffee flew from her hand, the lid snapping loose as the cup tipped forward. Liquid splashed across a crisp white shirt. Haley froze. "Oh my. I am so sorry," she blurted out instantly, horror rushing through her as she fumbled for napkins in her bag. "I wasn't looking. I can't believe I just did that." She braced herself for irritation, for annoyance, for the stiff politeness of someone already deciding she wasn't worth their time. Instead, she heard a laugh. "It's okay," the man said calmly, his voice even and unbothered. "It really is." Haley looked up. He was tall, neatly dressed despite the coffee stains spreading across his shirt, and entirely composed. His expression held no frustration, only mild amusement, as if this was an interruption rather than a problem. "I promise," he added gently, seeing the panic on her face. "It happens. I can get towels," Haley said quickly, "or dry cleaning. You don't need to do anything," he said, holding up a hand to stop her spiral. "I was moving too fast." That made her pause. Most people didn't take shared responsibility for accidents. They looked for fault, for inconvenience, for someone to blame. "Thank you," she said finally, still embarrassed but steadying herself. "I'm Haley." "Sean," he replied easily. "Nice to meet you, Haley, even under these circumstances." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and gave a small laugh of her own. "I swear this is not how I usually introduce myself." "I believe you," Sean said, his eyes warm. "You look like someone who's on a mission." She glanced down at her watch and winced. "I kind of am." "Same," he said. "Looks like we're headed the same way." They walked together toward the elevator bank, the brief silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Haley noticed that he didn't check his phone or rush ahead. He matched her pace naturally. "So," he said as they waited, "what brings you here today?" "I'm in the MBA program nearby," she replied. "Networking event." He nodded. "Good program. You're familiar?" she asked, surprised. "A little," he said. "I've worked with a few graduates." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside along with a handful of other attendees. Haley shifted her portfolio to her other arm, aware of the small space, but Sean didn't crowd her. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, posture open. "What's your focus?" he asked. "Marketing and strategy," she said. "Long term, I want to help businesses grow in ways that actually serve the communities they're part of, especially ones that tend to get overlooked." He considered that. "That's a thoughtful goal. I think business works better when people aren't treated like numbers," she added, then hesitated, wondering if she'd said too much. Sean smiled. "I agree." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out onto the event floor. The space buzzed with conversation, energy layered with ambition. Sean gestured toward the main hall. "Well," he said, "this is us. Thanks again," Haley said, meaning more than just the coffee. "Anytime," he replied. She watched him walk away, assuming he was another executive or sponsor, then turned toward the registration desk to check in. As she pinned on her name badge, she shook her head slightly, trying to reset her nerves. That was embarrassing. Focus. She moved through the room, introducing herself to a few people, exchanging quick conversations, staying grounded. The event unfolded smoothly, and soon the low hum of discussion shifted as attendees began moving toward the stage. Haley took a seat near the middle, notebook resting on her lap. The host stepped forward, welcoming everyone, speaking about innovation and leadership. Then he smiled and turned toward the side of the stage. "It's my pleasure to introduce today's host," he said, voice lifting slightly. "The CEO of Ventura Corp, Sean Patterson." Haley's head snapped up. Sean walked onto the stage, calm and confident, the same man she had spilled coffee on less than half an hour ago. Applause filled the room as he took his place at the podium. Her stomach flipped. So that was who he was. She felt a rush of heat creep up her neck, followed closely by something else, admiration. He didn't project authority through volume or ego. He spoke clearly, thoughtfully, crediting his team, emphasizing the importance of people over profit. As she listened, the earlier embarrassment softened into something quieter. Respect. When the formal portion ended, the room returned to motion. Conversations resumed, clusters forming and breaking apart. Haley stood, adjusting her dress, preparing to navigate the crowd again. She hadn't taken more than a few steps when she felt a familiar presence beside her. "Looks like we're properly introduced now," Sean said with a small smile. She laughed lightly. "I owe you a second apology." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." They talked, not about the accident, not about his title, about her program, about her work experience in Dallas, about how she believed marketing should create trust, not pressure. He listened closely. "Would you like me to introduce you to someone from my team?" he asked after a moment. "They're always looking for people who think the way you do." Haley blinked. Yes, that would be great." He waved someone over from across the room and made the introduction smoothly, speaking of Haley's insight with quiet confidence. The conversation flowed easily, her nerves fading as she settled into her own voice. A little later, as the crowd began to thin, Haley noticed Sean speaking briefly with someone from HR near the edge of the room. She didn't think much of it until she saw him gesture subtly in her direction. She caught his eye. He gave her a small nod. Haley walked out of the building later that evening with her portfolio tucked under her arm and her phone buzzing with new contacts. The city lights reflected off the glass behind her as she paused on the sidewalk, taking a breath. She had walked into that event hoping for an opportunity. She walked out knowing she had just crossed paths with someone who would change her life, though she couldn't yet see how. Not fully, not yet. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Haley noticed it because she wasn't expecting anything. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her as she reviewed notes for her afternoon class, and she almost ignored it. When she glanced down, the sender caught her attention immediately. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at the screen for a few seconds, letting her breathing steady. Whatever this was, it deserved her full focus. She set her notebook aside, straightened her posture, and tapped the message. "Thank you for attending our recent leadership event. After reviewing several profiles, we would like to invite you to interview for our competitive summer internship program." Haley read the message twice, then a third time. Her expression didn't explode into excitement. It settled into something deeper, validation, the kind that doesn't shout, but confirms. She replied professionally, confirming her availability, then closed her laptop and allowed herself one slow smile before standing up to head to class. The interview took place later that week at Ventura Corp's Austin office. Haley arrived early. She sat in the reception area with her portfolio resting on her knees, feet planted firmly on the floor. Around her, glass walls framed offices filled with quiet movement, people working with purpose, not panic. When her name was called, she rose smoothly and followed the recruiter down a hallway into a conference room. 3 people sat at the table, senior staff, decision makers. They greeted her warmly and invited her to sit. The questions came steadily. They asked about her background, her work in Dallas, her decision to pursue an MBA later in life. Haley answered calmly, drawing from experience instead of theory. She spoke about campaigns that succeeded because they respected audience intelligence, about mistakes that taught her more than wins ever did. When asked how she handled adversity, she didn't dramatize. She spoke plainly. "Setbacks force clarity," she said. "They strip away what isn't essential. What remains is what you build with." One of the interviewers nodded, making a note. They moved into scenario questions. Market entry, brand repositioning, community trust. Haley leaned forward slightly energized. She connected strategy to people, numbers to narrative, growth to responsibility. By the time the interview ended, the room felt different than when it began, not impressed, but engaged. As Haley left, the panel exchanged looks once the door closed. "She's not rehearsed," one of them said. "She's grounded and confident without being loud," another added. "She knows who she is," the third said. "That's harder to teach than skill." A week passed, then another. Haley didn't chase the outcome. She stayed focused on classwork, group projects, and her routines. When the offer email arrived, it felt almost expected, not from entitlement, but from alignment. She had earned it. She called Darlene first. "I got it," Haley said. Darlene's joy filled the line instantly. "I knew you would." Imani's reaction came minutes later. Loud, celebratory, unapologetically proud. By the time Haley walked into Ventura Corp on her first day as an intern, she did so without shrinking. The office hummed with activity. Meetings flowed. Conversations moved with intention. Haley was placed on a small strategy team and quickly learned the rhythm of the space. She observed before speaking, listened closely, and contributed thoughtfully when invited. She noticed Sean almost immediately, not because he announced himself, but because people responded when he entered a room. He didn't dominate discussions. He guided them. He asked precise questions. He expected preparation. The first time he passed her desk, he paused. "Good morning, Haley." She looked up, surprised. "Good morning," she replied. He nodded once and continued on. It was a small moment, but it stayed with her. Days turned into weeks. Sean occasionally stopped by her team's workspace, asking about progress. One afternoon, he listened as Haley explained a concern about a campaign's messaging. Instead of brushing it aside, he asked her to expand. 2 days later, a revised version of the campaign reflected her insight almost exactly. No credit was announced, no spotlight given. But Haley noticed, and more importantly, she felt it. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't being seen through the lens of loss or recovery. She was being seen as capable, as valuable, as someone whose mind mattered. By the middle of the internship, Haley's days had settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings began with brief check-ins and quiet preparation. Afternoons were filled with meetings that moved fast and demanded clarity. Evenings often stretched longer than planned, not because she was behind, but because she cared. She stayed until questions were answered, until numbers made sense, until ideas felt complete instead of rushed. Sean noticed. He didn't hover. He didn't single her out in public, but he sought her input more often, especially when conversations turned toward markets that required nuance instead of assumptions. One afternoon, during a discussion about an upcoming campaign aimed at expanding Ventura Corp's reach into diverse communities, Sean paused the meeting and looked directly at her. "Haley," he said, "you've lived inside the audience we're trying to reach. What do you think we're missing?" The room went quiet. Haley took a breath. She chose her words carefully, not softening the truth, but not sharpening it either. She spoke about authenticity, about how messaging could feel hollow when it talked at people instead of with them. She explained how trust was built through consistency, not slogans. Sean listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. That's exactly the gap. After the meeting, he caught up with her near the break area. "Thank you for speaking honestly in there," he said. "A lot of people won't." She shrugged lightly. "I figured it was better than pretending." A faint smile crossed his face. It usually is. Those moments multiplied. Quick conversations in hallways turned into longer exchanges near the coffee machine. Questions about projects shifted into discussions about purpose. Sean spoke less like a CEO guarding a brand and more like a man genuinely interested in perspective. During one of those quieter moments, he surprised her. "People think having everything means you never feel alone," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "It's not true. Sometimes it just means fewer people see you as human." Haley studied him, choosing empathy over curiosity. "That sounds heavy." "It can be," he admitted. "Most people see the title first, the numbers, not much else." She nodded slowly. "I've been on the other side of that, being seen only for what someone assumes you are." He looked at her then, really looked. "You carry yourself differently than most people here, Experience will do that, she said simply. She didn't give details. She didn't revisit pain. She shared lessons, not wounds. She talked about learning to trust her instincts, about recognizing when to walk away from situations that demanded she shrink. Sean absorbed every word. As the internship neared its end, a group lunch was scheduled for the interns, a casual thank you from leadership. Schedules shifted unexpectedly, conflicts stacking on top of one another. One by one, interns dropped out until only two names remained, Haley and Sean. They both noticed at the same time. "Well," Sean said lightly, setting his phone down. "Looks like it's just us." Haley smiled. "I don't mind." Lunch turned out to be easy. They chose a quiet place nearby, far from the office atmosphere. Conversation flowed without effort. They laughed about small things, miscommunications, early career mistakes, the pressure of always needing to be right. At one point, Sean shook his head and said, "You know, I don't get to talk like this very often." "Like what?" Haley asked. "Like a person," he replied. She held his gaze, something warm and steady settling between them. A week later, her phone rang while she was folding laundry in her apartment. The number wasn't saved. "Hello?" "Hi, Haley," Sean said, voice noticeably less composed than usual. "It's Sean. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." She smiled to herself. "You're fine." She leaned against the counter, listening. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" Her heart skipped, not wildly, not recklessly, but enough to notice. They chose her place. It felt right, familiar, honest. Haley cooked that evening, moving comfortably around her kitchen. Cajun chicken pasta simmered on the stove, and peach cobbler baked in the oven, filling the apartment with warmth. Sean arrived on time, dressed casually, holding nothing but a small smile. Dinner was relaxed. They talked about music, about family traditions, about the strange paths life took when plans fell apart. When Sean joked that he might have to propose just for the food, Haley laughed and told him to finish his plate first. After dessert, they settled onto the couch, the city quiet outside her window. Conversation softened, drifting into reflection. "I feel different around you," Sean admitted, less guarded. Haley met his eyes. "Me too." The kiss that followed was gentle and unhurried, respectful, full of promise rather than urgency. Later that night, after Sean left, Haley lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart calm but full. She hadn't been looking for this, but somehow she had found it. What surprised Haley most wasn't how quickly her relationship with Sean grew. It was how naturally it fit into the life she was already building. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden rearranging of her priorities. Instead, Sean folded into her rhythm as if he had always belonged there. On weeknights, he showed up at her apartment with takeout balanced carefully in one hand and a grin that softened the fatigue she carried after long study sessions. He would spread her flashcards across the coffee table, reading questions aloud while she paced the living room, explaining concepts out loud until they stuck. "You're teaching me half this stuff," he joked one evening. "Don't get used to it," she replied, smiling. "I still expect you to let me graduate on my own." Weekends were quieter. They explored small Austin spots, local cafes, tucked away bookstores, places where no one cared who he was or what company he ran. Sean seemed to relish those moments, blending in, listening more than talking. With Haley, he wasn't performing leadership. He was just present. Still, his world didn't disappear. The first formal event they attended together came with all the weight Haley expected. The venue was elegant, filled with polished conversations and expensive tastes. She noticed quickly that she was one of the few black women in the room. The awareness didn't shake her, but it sharpened her senses. Sean stayed close, introducing her with pride, not as an accessory but as an equal. Midway through the evening, a donor approached them with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So," the man said casually, glancing between them, "I didn't realize you had a type." Sean's response was immediate. "I do," he said evenly. "Brilliant, principled people who lead with integrity. Haley happens to check every box." The man faltered, muttered something non-committal, and excused himself. Sean's arm rested firmly around her waist. Haley didn't smile right away. She didn't need to. The moment settled in her chest quietly, solid and unmovable. She had spent years learning how to protect her dignity alone. Standing beside Sean, she realized she no longer had to do that by herself. The trip to Dallas came a few weeks later. Sunday dinner at Darlene's house was a tradition, one Haley hadn't broken even after moving. This time, Sean came with her, flowers in hand, posture respectful from the moment he stepped inside. Darlene greeted him warmly, eyes sharp but kind. By the time dinner was served, Sean was laughing with Haley's uncles about football and listening intently as Aunt Loretta explained the proper way to fry okra. At some point, Haley stepped back into the kitchen and stopped. Sean stood at the counter, apron tied around his waist, nodding seriously as he followed instructions, entirely unbothered by flour on his sleeve or the teasing commentary around him. Her chest tightened. This was the moment she hadn't known she needed, the merging of worlds she once believed could never coexist, her family, her future, standing together without friction. Later that night, as they drove back, Sean reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for letting me be part of that," he said. She squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for respecting it." Time moved forward, steady and generous. A year passed. Haley finished her MBA at the top of her class. Graduation day arrived warm and bright, the campus alive with celebration. From the stage, she spotted Darlene and Imani immediately, both waving with unrestrained pride. Sean stood between them, clapping harder than anyone. After the ceremony, he led her to the rose garden. She noticed the ring only when he knelt. Her answer came through tears. Yes. In that moment, Haley understood something fully and without doubt. This wasn't recovery, this was arrival. Planning the wedding didn't feel like a performance to Haley. That surprised her. After everything she'd been through, she expected anxiety to hover over every decision. She expected to second-guess herself, to wonder if joy was temporary or fragile. But as she stood inside the historic Dallas church for the first walkthrough, sunlight filtering softly through tall stained-glass windows, what she felt most was clarity. This was right. The church carried history in its walls. Generations had stood where she stood now, choosing love in full view of community and faith. Haley ran her fingers lightly along the polished wood of a pew, imagining the aisle filled with familiar faces, family, laughter, shared memory. Sean stood beside her, hands folded loosely, taking it all in. "It feels like home," he said quietly. She nodded. "That's why I wanted it here." The reception hall was just a few blocks away, elegant but warm. High ceilings, open space, room for dancing that didn't feel stiff or distant. Haley already knew what she wanted the food to say. "This isn't going to be one of those weddings where people leave hungry," she told the coordinator with a smile. Barbecue brisket, Cajun catfish, classic southern sides alongside refined starters, a blend that mirrored her life, rooted, proud, and elevated without apology. Sean laughed when she explained it. "I love that you're not trying to impress anyone." "I'm not," she said calmly. "I'm honoring where I come from." Even as planning moved forward, Haley didn't stop working. She took on consulting projects tied loosely to Ventura's leadership pipeline, contributing strategy without attaching herself to the identity of CEO's fiancé. She worked from her laptop at cafes, from her dining table late at night, maintaining boundaries that mattered to her. She had promised herself she wouldn't disappear into the role of someone's wife again. Sean noticed and respected it. One evening, as they reviewed guest lists on the couch, Haley paused unexpectedly. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked quietly. He turned to face her fully. "What kind of wrong?" She exhaled. "The kind that makes you feel like you're waiting for the floor to drop." Sean didn't dismiss it. He didn't minimize it. Instead, he reached for her hand. "Love doesn't have to feel like that," he said. "You don't have to brace yourself here." She studied his face, searching for certainty, and finding it. Meeting his family came next. The dinner was formal, reserved at first. Polite questions, careful observation. Haley answered honestly, never shrinking, never over-explaining. She spoke about her work, her values, her family. What softened the room wasn't persuasion, it was Sean, the way he looked at her, the ease in his voice, the visible happiness he didn't attempt to hide. By dessert, conversation flowed more freely. Respect replaced hesitation. Later that night, Haley sat with Imani, shoes kicked off, wedding binder open on the table between them. "You leveled up," Imani said, half teasing, half serious. "But more than that, you healed." Haley nodded slowly. "I'm still scared sometimes." Imani smiled. Yeah, but scared isn't the same as broken. Haley closed the binder and leaned back, peace settling in. She felt whole. And somewhere beyond that calm, the past stirred quietly, unfinished, waiting. When Morgan left Haley, he truly believed he was stepping into a better life. At first, everything felt exactly the way he had imagined it would. Chloe's world moved fast. Late nights, loud music, rooftop parties where no one asked deep questions. She loved attention, and by extension she loved being seen with him. Morgan told himself that was passion, that this constant motion meant he was alive again. They went out constantly, restaurants where the lighting was dim and the prices were loud, events where Chloe posed effortlessly for photos, phone always in her hand, angling for the best shot. Morgan paid, smiled, and tried to keep up, but cracks formed early. Arguments didn't come from nowhere. They came from small things that refused to stay small. Chloe wanted more attention, more posts, more proof that she mattered publicly. Morgan, still anchored to routines and structure, felt drained by the constant demand to perform. You never post me, she snapped one night, scrolling through her phone. We're together all the time, he replied, genuinely confused. That's not the point, she said flatly. Money became another fault line. Chloe spent freely, assuming his comfort meant unlimited access. When he hesitated, she accused him of being controlling. When he gave in, resentment followed. What Morgan had mistaken for excitement slowly revealed itself as exhaustion. The nights grew quieter, not peaceful, just empty. Chloe stayed out later. Morgan stayed home more. Conversations lost depth, reduced to logistics and irritation. Then one evening, without ceremony, Chloe announced her decision. I'm moving to Los Angeles, she said, scrolling while she spoke. I got an opportunity. Morgan looked up. When? Soon, she replied. Honestly, this was never meant to be permanent. He waited for something else. Hesitation, reassurance, regret. None came. You were convenient, she added, not cruelly, just honestly, but I don't want this long term. And then she was gone. Morgan found himself alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too large. Expensive furniture, clean surfaces, silence that stretched longer each night. There was no one asking how his day went. No shared meals, no laughter drifting down the hallway, only space and memory. It began quietly. Sitting on the couch, he remembered Haley's voice calling him to dinner. He remembered her in the kitchen, moving easily, humming without realizing it. Holidays surfaced next, her laugh, the warmth she brought into rooms without trying. He hadn't lost chaos, he had lost companionship. One night, unable to sleep, Morgan opened his phone and typed Haley's name. He told himself he was just curious. Her profile loaded slowly. The first photo stopped him cold. Haley in a graduation gown, head held high, smile confident and earned. Pride radiated from the image. She looked nothing like the woman he had left behind. He scrolled. Another photo, Haley standing beside a man at an elegant event. The man's posture was relaxed, assured. His hand rested lightly at her back. They looked like equals. Morgan's stomach tightened. Then he saw the ring. The caption was simple. Forward-looking, joy without explanation, engaged. Morgan sat back, phone heavy in his hand. Shock washed through him first, followed by something sharper. Envy mixed with regret so deep it left him breathless. He recognized the name attached to the article someone had tagged in the comments. Sean Patterson, Billionaire CEO. Morgan laughed once bitterly. He had thrown her away, convinced she would remain where he left her. Frozen in grief, waiting. Instead, she had built a life that no longer had room for him. Nights passed with thoughts that refused to quiet. He replayed moments he had dismissed. Times Haley supported him without condition. Times she chose patience over pride. He saw now what he hadn't then, and it hurt. He considered reaching out, drafted messages he never sent, apologies that felt too small for the damage done. In the end, he didn't contact her, but when he learned the wedding was in Dallas, something inside him shifted. He told himself he just wanted to see her happy. That lie felt easier than admitting the truth, that he needed closure he didn't deserve. And so, quietly, without an invitation, Morgan decided he would go. The morning of the wedding arrived gently. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the hotel suite where Haley stood in front of the mirror, robe loosely tied, hair half done, makeup brushes scattered across the vanity. The room buzzed with quiet movement, stylists murmuring, dresses hanging neatly, soft music playing in the background. Darlene sat nearby, watching her daughter with eyes full of pride. Imani hovered close, phone in hand, documenting moments, but never intruding. Haley didn't feel rushed, she felt present. The dress waited on its hanger, ivory lace elegant without excess, tailored to fit the woman she had become. When she finally stepped into it, Darlene helped fasten the back with steady hands. "You look like yourself," her mother said softly. That mattered more than any compliment. Across town, Sean stood in a quiet room at the church, adjusting his cufflinks while his groomsmen joked lightly behind him. He wasn't nervous in the way people expected. He was certain, calm, ready. When the ceremony began, guests filled the pews, conversation fading into anticipation. At the back of the church, a man slipped in quietly, taking a seat where he hoped no one would notice. Morgan. He kept his head down, hands folded, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. He hadn't come to disrupt anything. He told himself that repeatedly. He was there to witness, to acknowledge what he had lost and what Haley had gained. The music shifted. Everyone stood. Haley appeared at the entrance, bouquet in hand, arm linked with her uncle's. The moment stretched as she stepped forward, each movement unhurried, confident. Sean's breath caught. The world narrowed to her. She walked toward him with a calm smile, eyes bright, posture open. This wasn't a woman hoping to be chosen. This was a woman choosing. From the back pew, Morgan watched, the weight of realization pressing down on him. This was the moment he understood fully. Not just what he had lost, but what he had failed to recognize when it was his to protect. The vows were simple and intentional. They spoke about choosing each other daily, about honoring pasts without letting them dictate the future, about loyalty built through action, not promises alone. When the officiant invited them to seal the commitment, the kiss was met with warm applause that filled the church. For Haley, it felt like arrival. For Morgan, it felt like truth. As guests began filing out toward the reception, Haley lingered briefly near the altar, greeting relatives, laughing softly. That was when she saw him. Morgan stood near the back, uncertain, as if debating whether to leave unnoticed. Imani noticed immediately and moved instinctively, stepping between them before Morgan could approach. "He's not here to cause trouble," Morgan said quietly. "I just need a moment. That's all." Imani studied him, then glanced toward Haley. Haley made the decision herself. She handed her bouquet to Imani and walked toward him, lace trailing softly behind her. The distance between them closed slowly, deliberately. They stopped a few feet apart. "Congratulations," Morgan said, voice steady but low. "You look truly happy." "Thank you," Haley replied. Her tone was calm, open, unguarded. "I shouldn't be here," he admitted, "but I needed to say this face to face. What I did to you was wrong. Leaving the way I did, it was the biggest mistake of my life." Haley listened without flinching. "I made peace with it a long time ago," she said gently, "not because it didn't hurt, but because holding on to that pain wasn't going to build the life I wanted." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I see that now." She glanced briefly toward the aisle, where Sean stood speaking with family, then back to Morgan. In a strange way, she continued, "Your leaving forced me to choose myself. It didn't feel like a gift then, but it became one." Morgan swallowed. "I'm glad someone saw your value." "So am I," she said. They shared a brief handshake, firm, respectful, final. No bitterness, no longing, just closure. Haley turned and walked back toward Sean. He met her halfway, concern flickering across his face. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She smiled, warm and sure. "I am." She glanced back once more, offering Morgan a small nod, not forgiveness for him, but freedom for herself. Morgan watched as she disappeared into the celebration, then turned and stepped outside into the Dallas sun. The warmth hit his face as he exhaled slowly. Pain lingered, so did clarity, and with it, the faint hope that he might one day become better than the man who lost her. If you're still here watching Haley choose peace over bitterness, drop peace in the comments and share this with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over. A year into marriage, life didn't feel loud. It felt steady. Haley woke most mornings before the sun fully climbed over Dallas, the house still wrapped in that gentle quiet that existed only between night and day. She moved softly through the kitchen, starting the coffee maker before Sean came down the stairs, tie already loosened, sleeves rolled as if the day had started in his head long before it did in the world. They shared the counter space easily now. No negotiating, no stepping around each other like strangers. She slid a mug toward him without asking. He kissed her cheek in thanks, a habit that felt as natural as breathing. They talked about schedules the way partners did, his meetings, her calls, which evening they'd see Darlene, whether Imani was dropping by unannounced again. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Sean still ran Ventura Corp with the same focus and precision that defined him long before Haley entered his life. What had changed wasn't his ambition, it was his balance. He listened more, left earlier when he could, protected space the way he once protected results. Haley, meanwhile, stepped fully into her own leadership. She wasn't shadowing Sean or borrowing his platform. She built her work deliberately, consulting with Ventura on initiatives that supported underrepresented entrepreneurs, but also developing her own programs, mentorship, pipelines, access workshops, strategy sessions designed for women who had talent but lacked doors. Her office days were full. Meetings where she led conversations, calls where people asked for her insight, not because of who she married, but because of what she knew. She saw pieces of her younger self in the women she mentored, smart, capable, doubting themselves more than they deserved to. "Don't wait for permission," she told one young woman after a session. "You don't need to be perfect to be ready." Marriage didn't erase challenges. Sometimes it revealed them. There were evenings when schedules clashed, when exhaustion shortened patience. Once, a disagreement over a last-minute trip turned tense before either of them realized it. They stopped, they talked, they listened. Love didn't feel like tension held together by silence. It felt like trust strong enough to hold disagreement without breaking. Date nights didn't disappear. They changed. Sometimes it was a reservation at a favorite restaurant. Other times it was takeout on the couch, shoes kicked off, laughter replacing formality. Family visits stayed frequent. Sean never missed a Sunday dinner if he could help it. She stared at the small object in her hand longer than she meant to. Then she smiled. That evening, she waited until Sean came home, tie already undone, energy softened by the day. "Hey," she said casually, sliding something across the counter. He picked it up, looked at it, looked at her. His face transformed instantly, not calculated joy, not composed excitement, but pure, unfiltered happiness. "Are you serious?" he asked, voice barely steady. She nodded. "We are—" Sean laughed once, a sound so open it startled even him. He crossed the room in 2 steps, lifting her into a hug that felt like gratitude made physical. "We're really doing this," he said, resting his forehead against hers. They talked late that night, not about fear, but about names, about space, about how they wanted their children to feel growing up. Nervous excitement threaded through every word. As they lay in bed, Haley stared at the ceiling, heart full in a way that didn't feel fragile. She wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. She was preparing for something to arrive. And for the first time in her life, yes didn't feel risky. It felt right. By the time the twins arrived, Haley and Sean had already learned one important truth about parenthood. Nothing prepares you for it. The Dallas house that once felt calm and orderly now carried a different kind of energy, one that hummed through every room at all hours. Baby swings sat beside the couch, soft blankets draped over chairs, bottles lined the counter like soldiers ready for duty. Oliver and Olivia had entered the world weeks earlier, small and perfect, their cries sharp and insistent, their presence immediately rearranging every part of life. The nights were the hardest. Haley often woke to the sound of one baby fussing just as the other settled. She moved on instinct now, lifting Oliver from his crib, swaying gently as she whispered reassurances she didn't remember learning. Sean would already be up, warming a bottle, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, eyes heavy but focused. They worked as a unit. "Your turn," Sean murmured once, passing Olivia into her arms with a tired grin. I just had my turn, Haley replied, but she took the baby anyway, smiling despite herself. Exhaustion showed up in quiet ways, missed steps, half-finished sentences, laughter that came too easily from being overtired. But resentment never settled in. They checked in with each other. They rested when they could. They forgave quickly. Sean surprised Haley in ways that still caught her off guard. He didn't step back when things got messy. He stepped in. He learned how to change diapers efficiently. He bounced the twins through late-night fussiness, pacing the living room with one baby tucked against his chest while humming off-key. He listened closely at doctor's appointments, asked questions, took notes. Watching him, Haley sometimes felt a quiet awe. This was partnership. In the early mornings, when the house was still and the city outside barely stirring, Haley rocked Olivia near the window, the soft glow of dawn filtering in. Oliver slept in the bassinet beside her, chest rising and falling steadily. In those moments, memories surfaced, not painfully, but clearly. She thought about the future she once imagined with Morgan, the assumptions she had made, the plans that never materialized. There was no bitterness in the comparison, only gratitude. Her life hadn't turned out the way she first envisioned. It had turned out better. Darlene visited often, arms always full, food containers, baby clothes, advice that mixed wisdom with gentle reminders to rest. She held the twins like they were treasures, humming old songs under her breath. Imani showed up loud and loving, declaring herself the favored aunt, snapping photos, making the babies laugh with exaggerated faces. Sean fit seamlessly into the extended family, moving through gatherings with ease, listening more than talking, earning trust not through status, but presence. Somewhere out there, Morgan lived his life. Haley didn't think about him often anymore. That chapter had closed. One night, after a long day that began before sunrise and ended well past midnight, Haley stood between the cribs, watching Oliver and Olivia sleep. Their faces were peaceful now, tiny hands curled, breathing steady. She leaned down, adjusting a blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, words meant for resilience, for second chances, for love that didn't demand she disappear to survive. Sean appeared in the doorway, watching her quietly. She turned, met his eyes, and smiled. They were tired, they were stretched, and they were deeply, profoundly thankful. The park was quiet in that gentle way only early evening could bring. Tall trees lined the walking path, their leaves catching the soft glow of the lowering sun. Families passed by at an easy pace, laughter drifting on the breeze, joggers nodding politely as they moved past. In the middle of it all, Haley walked slowly, one hand resting on the stroller handle, the other occasionally brushing against Sean's arm. Oliver slept peacefully, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Olivia stirred slightly, then settled again, soothed by the motion. Sean adjusted the stroller canopy and smiled. "Hard to believe this is our life." Haley glanced at him. "Sometimes I still stop and take it in." They walked a few more steps in silence before Sean spoke again. "Do you ever think about where we started?" She nodded, not with regret, with perspective. Her words lingered as the path curved slightly, opening into a wider view of the park. Haley's mind drifted, not backward into pain, but across the road that led her here. She remembered what it felt like to be chosen openly. Sean never hesitated with her, never hid their relationship, never made her feel like love was something she had to earn by shrinking. He chose her in rooms full of people and in moments when no one was watching. She remembered how easily people believed excitement meant happiness. Morgan had chased novelty, convinced it was greener on the other side. He never stopped to water what he had. The outcome of that choice wasn't punishment, it was consequence. Quiet, lasting consequence. Haley's own growth had come from heartbreak, yes, but more importantly, from what she did with it. She thought of a young woman she mentored recently, eyes swollen from crying, voice unsure as she talked about a breakup that felt like the end of everything. Haley hadn't rushed her. She listened. "This isn't the end," she told her gently. "It's information, about what you need, about what you deserve." Knowing her worth had changed everything. There were opportunities Haley turned down now, projects that offered visibility but demanded compromise. She chose alignment over approval. Every time she did, she felt stronger for it. She never forgot who helped her stand when she couldn't do it alone. Imani's humor, steady and sharp, cutting through darkness. Darlene's arms, always open, always grounding. Forgiveness had freed her, not because Morgan needed it, but because she did. Letting go wasn't weakness, it was self-respect. At family gatherings, differences no longer felt like barriers. Sean's family and hers blended easily now, conversation and laughter bridging backgrounds that once felt distant. Love made room, respect filled it. Actions had consequences. Always. Her integrity led her here, this walk, this family, this peace. His betrayal led him elsewhere, carrying lessons only he could learn. And through it all, Haley never disappeared. She didn't become the billionaire's wife. She became herself, fully, openly, without apology. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in warm tones, Haley stopped walking. She reached into the stroller, lifting Olivia carefully into her arms. Sean mirrored her, lifting Oliver, holding him close. They stood together, facing the horizon. Haley rested her head briefly against Sean's shoulder. She thought about the woman she once was, the one sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at a half-empty closet, convinced her life had ended. It hadn't. It had begun again. If this story reminded you that someone walking away doesn't get to define your ending, tap that like button, comment the lesson that hit you hardest, and subscribe to Stories by Mr. Flex for more stories of love, karma, growth, and second chances. Because sometimes, losing what you thought you wanted is exactly how you find the life you deserved.